don't think of it as leaving your job and you're going to be sitting at a beach. That's not really what financial freedom means. It's like, let's go after our passions and kind of really work through them.
Welcome to the Freedom Point Real Estate Podcast, where we talk about creating more time freedom through passive real estate investing. Passive investing in real estate challenges conventional investment wisdom. We are passionate about learning and sharing resources with others who are ready to transform their investing mindset. Quick disclaimer as always, I am not a CPA, I am not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer, ADP. I'm glad you're here. Now let's dig in.
All right, welcome back, Freedom Point Podcast listeners. Thank you again for jumping into another episode of the Freedom Point. Before we get started here, I just wanted to let the listening audience know that I appreciate you so much. I've had such tremendous feedback the past few weeks, people giving me a call saying they really appreciate, the caliber of the guests that we're bringing on here. Keep providing us with that feedback. The more feedback we get from you, the better set we are up for the future. We're well into 100 episodes now, and we're not stopping, anytime soon. So without further ado, I have another amazing and fantastic guest with me today, Divya Smith. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Very excited to be here, Jeremy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really excited to, or looking forward, I should say, to really chopping this up with you. You're a little bit similar to me in the fact that we both kind of have this technology background. So definitely looking forward to talking a little bit more about your past there. But even second to that, the way that you're now transitioned into a role where you're partnering with investors and helping them, get started on their real estate investing journey, or maybe help them take their real estate investing journey to the next level. So with all that said, I'm going to read a short little bio on Divya and we'll get rocking and rolling here. Divya is a technology executive who turned to real estate investing for a broader impact and purpose. Her goal is to help busy professionals build passive income streams through real estate that allows them to achieve financial freedom and focus on what matters to them the most. So that all said, maybe you can kind of help our listening audience learn a little bit more about you, kind of your background, what you're currently focused on today, et cetera.
Yes, absolutely, Jeremy. So thank you again for having me. It's been a fascinating journey for me personally. And, I've kind of heard similar journey from you as well and a few folks. I was in technology for full time for about 20 years. And in that space, I've had some really large role in corporate America. I worked in big companies like Target Corporation. I worked at United Health Group. I worked at US Bank. And in all those roles, I ended up taking on some really kind of the edge growing roles, which were great, but they all required a lot of time and effort. So at the end of my career, having managed large teams, I had kind of teams in US, in India, and kind of managing all of that with 100, 150 people at time. It really takes a toll on, it took a toll on me personally, but then also my family because I'm not able to spend enough time with them. And that was a moment for me to realize, if I'm spending all this time and there are other people just like me who are spending all this time, we don't have enough time to be able to research what other investing or financial options there are. So that kind of led, the thought process of me looking out for what other ways are there for people to be able to live financially free. And I think that freedom word is a little bit subjective for a lot of people. So we'll maybe break that down in a few minutes here. So that's when I started to look and found a couple people who were also, senior executives in corporate America. Both had quit their jobs and were doing real estate passively. And that was just such a fascinating concept to me. And I talked around to a bunch of people around me, people who were working, and they had not heard that. So it is still a concept I think a lot of people are just starting to learn about. It is still new and fresh. So I took it as a mission for me to kind of jump into that space, but also share it with people. One thing I'll share in all this is there are good deals and there are okay deals and there are bad deals. But, as we kind of continue our conversation, it has taken me time and effort to figure out which are the good ones and how to focus on them.
Yeah, Divya, that's fantastic. So I made myself a couple little bit of notes here. So a couple of things that you talked about. You talked about kind of this transition that you went through, where you were in corporate America, you had, a few different technology jobs. You were maybe kind of looking to, maybe escape a little bit, from that particular rat race. You talked about, wanting to seek more time freedom. You talked about really, learning about, real estate investing on the passive side from, somebody you knew, part of your network, right? And then you took it upon yourself, really to get educated. So can you kind of talk us a little bit, or talk to our audience a little bit more about, kind of what did you do then? What was kind of your next steps to really get started? Are you personally investing your own, money into real estate investments? Have you seen, how some of them have maybe gone full cycle? Have you had, deals that you've really, seen how it can change, a person's wealth building trajectory?
Yes, absolutely. Happy to share that. So I started out passively investing. And before I even did that, like you mentioned, I started seeking out, conferences I could go to, read as much as I could. And one of the things people assume that, hey, we can learn it all just either through podcasts or either just YouTube. And if we think about it, we learn many different ways. You have to kind of network. It gives you kind of different way to learn. You got to read some books. You got to be able to listen to some podcasts. You got to then go out and do some of your own research, right? So it does require a lot of effort, but I think it is kind of a growing path that we all need to take or should be taking to at least help ourselves build financially stable future. So that's really where I started to learn. And then I also went into passive investing. I invested with people that I knew. I did my research and background with sponsors, but even through that process, what I knew 2 to 3 years ago to what I know now is, of course, different. And I would invest differently now that I know what I know.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds to me like you learned by doing, right? And that's one of the challenges that I think a lot of people have is, once you've got the network, once you've got the education, once what tools there are out there from a financial perspective, really the next step is actually taking action. And it's not until we take action that we really learn, about what works and maybe what doesn't work, which is also why I am, and I'm sure you are as well, a big fan of diversification, right? Not
Absolutely.
every investment opportunity that you invest into is going to be a home run, right? It's not true in Wall Street and it's not true in Main Street, right? So
Right.
really appreciate that perspective. So we talked a little bit more earlier, or we talked a little bit about, this kind of concept of freedom, right? We hear that being thrown out there a lot, depending upon which circles people run in. We hear about time freedom. We hear about, financial freedom. We hear
Location.
about financial independence, right? These types of things. So really, what does that mean for you specifically? And how does that message typically resonate best with your audience?
Yes, absolutely. So you said it perfectly. The freedom concept, right? It's the time freedom, location freedom, is the financial freedom, right? Like those are the three big ones that we talk about. The reality of situation is most people they want to escape the rat race, but on their own terms. And it doesn't mean they want to completely walk away. So, one of the things that I have to be very candid with my investors and anybody I talk to is I was in technology and I absolutely loved it. I absolutely loved every single role I've done. Of course, there were times I was working lots of hours, but I loved it. I enjoyed it. And there's still part of me that, wants to do some of it. So for me, that freedom meant I did not want to work full time. But if I could work on small consulting gigs, if I could do small projects at time, that really allowed, freedom for me. Like you mentioned, the time freedom for me was really big. I did not want to do, 10, 12 hours a day. Of course, pet peeve of mine, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, is being on meetings after meetings after meetings. That is one thing that just kills joy in me. so, so for me, it was like, how can I get out of this meeting cycle that we have created, but truly still deliver value? So for me, that freedom was more about, can I work on things that I really want while also building a real estate portfolio and then sharing my knowledge with others. And it has led to even so many more opportunities that I didn't realize because I have now more time and I can go seek more opportunities. So I think that's really my message to most people is like, don't think of it as leaving your job and you're going to be sitting at a beach, because even that you're going to get bored in a few weeks. Maybe, some people can push it to about a few months, but that's not really what financial freedom means. It's Like, let's go after our passions and kind of really work through them.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big supporter of people, spending more time thinking about it in the lens of maybe replacing the dependence, on active income. But, the truth is that it would likely, in most people's cases, it would take a few $1 million in order to fully replace a person's active W-2 income if we're looking at a distribution payment of, say, 8%, right? So I
Absolutely.
think it's more important that people focus on the fact that you may get to a point, as you compound investments and stack them on top of each other over a period of decades, right? Where you then can get to the point in your financial wealth building journey where you're able to look back and say, because I took action steps 20 years ago, now I'm finally in a position today where I can truly look back at the amount of income that it takes for me to sustain my current lifestyle and know that I don't have to continue to actively earn as much income as I would have had I not made those decisions earlier on.
Yes, absolutely. I love that, Jeremy. And just to kind of share what you mentioned, we do think of replacing our income, but then we don't realize when our income is smaller, our taxes are smaller, we are working less, we have more free time to be able to cook food at home, able to do certain things at home. So our expenses go lower. So it is really like a compounding effect. So, taking that time to really identify what's my basic need, my basic expenses. And then for me specifically, if I give my example, I took 6 to 9 months of my expenses and I had that much in savings before I took any actions. And I wanted to make sure I was solidly covered before kind of realizing what that would be. And for most people, it can range between, 4,000 to 6, 7,000, depending on where their mortgage is. So you multiply that by 9, and that's kind of what you want to have in savings for sure. Concretely, kind of giving you a plan here. The second thing would be you want to make sure that can you cover your expenses, your basic expenses, your mortgage, your food, your electricity, some of the utilities. Okay, and that if that's probably going to be less than what you're looking for, and you realize like you have that freedom of time a lot sooner. And if that just means instead of working 40 hours a week, you ask for 20 hours a week and it gives you more time at home and with kids, it just is a different way to think about lifestyle, which I know many people in Europe have already taken, but we're just way far behind in learning how to live.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that you said that kind of made me start to think about this a little bit more, is this concept of, you know, cash flow investing versus equity investing. And that's one of the things that I really like about, investing in real estate. And specifically is if you are aware of enough operators out there, enough different types of business plans, and quite frankly, there's a lot of different investment, classes you could invest into. There's different, it could be either a build to rent opportunity, it could be a value add, right? It could be an assisted living property that maybe is going to take 20 years to go full cycle. One of the nice things about real estate investing is if you diversify across enough different asset classes with a number of different business plans, so to speak, you can change the way in which you invest in the future when those deals start to go full cycle. So an
Yeah.
individual that's in their 30s and 40s, for example, they may be more focused on taking a little bit greater risk with additional equity upside potentially at the end. Whereas as somebody that gets into their 40s, 50s, 60s, et cetera, and now is looking at walking away from active income, they may be more focused on cash flow type investments at that point, and less focused on chasing that equity.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeremy. And like you mentioned, we got to be very clear about what our goals are. If you're looking for cash flow, it's different asset classes. If you're looking for equity at the end, that tends to be different. And then you mentioned, about diversification. I was basically all stocks, when I got started in this and realized stocks and real estate have an inverse relationship to each other. When stock tends to be high, which is about right now, real estate is starting to go low. 2 years ago, stocks were like bad. Like our 401ks, we didn't even want to look at them. And then real estate was soaring. So why wouldn't we want to diversify and truly take advantage of, like that diversification, their opposite relationship to each other, and really have ability to kind of buy real estate when it's low and then kind of hold on to it for a longer term with the mindset, yes, you will, have equity at the end, but you got to have it cash flowing day one. I think that's been my personal goal in kind of just any deals that we end up doing. We also make sure, they are cash flowing, because if it's not, something is off, right? Like, so it's not a good deal to do that. So for us, we always focus on a cash flowing deal, but then of course there's a high equity potential at the end.
Yeah. Now I know everybody's investing goals are a little bit different, but for your average investor, what would you recommend is kind of that healthy balance between, Wall Street investments versus more Main Street investments?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that I've actually been personally working on mine as well. So, um, before I got started in real estate, majority of my savings were all in 401ks, and I was maxing out my 401k. Good news is, if folks who are listening to this, if you're not maxing out your 401k, especially if your employer matches any percentage, oh my gosh, need to start do that. That's bare minimum. Then you want to make sure you have enough savings in place for a rainy day for 6 to 9 months, and then just additional more in stock. So if that comes out to be, let's say, 50 to 60% of your assets that end up being either between stocks and 401k, that's great. But my number at this moment is 30 to 40% in real estate, because that is my long-term play. I know I'm not going to likely get a whole lot of Social Security. I'm not banking on it. So that's not going to happen. The way 401k savings have kind of turned out, yes, I've seen an average about 7 to 8%, but inflation just is really killing all of the savings that I've had. So if I look at really all my expenses and kind of what was in 20 years of my 401k plans, it really hasn't panned out to what I thought it would by now. And I think that was another wake up call for me to look at my account and go, I've been saving for 20 years. I have not bought any fancy cars. I have not, done any of these other extravagant things, yet I'm not where I thought I would be by 20 years.
Yeah, you brought up an excellent point, and I've mentioned this before on this show, and that is, I've been maxing out my own personal 401k plan, with the company match and everything for almost 25 years now, and I look at the balance retrospective of the fact that I haven't paid taxes yet, right? On,
Yeah.
on some of that balance that's sitting there. I look at that balance and I think to myself, at my current lifestyle right now with my family, my entire 401k balance would be depleted in 3 years if I were to retire right now. So I've
Yeah.
been maxing out my 401k for 25 years, right? But yet I only have 3 years of income to live on. So that means if I continue to max out my 401k for the next 25 years, right? Statistically speaking, I'm going to have 6 years, to retire on. So,
Mhm.
great points that you bring that up. I would like to ask you another question, and that is, you know, investing in real estate isn't always rosy, right?
Yeah.
Things
Yep.
don't always go up and to the right, at least in the short term, right? So, have there been any challenges that you personally have faced as a limited partner investor, that you'd be willing to share, and maybe what kind of the outcome is projected or expected to be?
Yeah. So unfortunately, as a limited partner, I did invest in the top of the market, which was in 2022, and I think a lot of us are seeing hurt in a lot of those properties, especially with the interest rates going up higher. Um, and even in some of those investments, honestly, I worked with some of very strong operational partners. Yet, we're seeing some hurt there, and I may potentially get 50% of my original investment back. Now, something that I invested in last year, I expect that to still kind of meet all the numbers. So it is one of those things. Until I took action, I didn't even realize and learn, what good looked like, what great looked like. I don't want to downplay the fact, there are chances that you can lose money, but I equate it with the same thing as stocks. When I purchased certain stock, and I'm going to totally pick on Disney here. I bought Disney stock in about 3 years ago. I was very, very headstrong on it, very bullish about it. bought $30,000 to $40,000 worth of it, and I just sold it for 25K because I was like, I can stay here, keep losing money, or I could move it else somewhere, where I'm gonna make money. So there's kind of losses and gains everywhere. I think the hard part is we get stuck in analysis paralysis. We can't let ourselves, like, the fear just get the best of us. We need to kind of keep moving forward and taking actions.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I had mentioned earlier, it's really when we take those action steps that we truly learn, right? Otherwise, we're just gonna, stay in the starting blocks and never, make any forward progress. So, I know, and that when it comes to investing in real estate, and you could even say make the argument in Wall Street as well, it all comes down to the team that's managing, whatever that business plan happens to be, right? So can you maybe talk through, what that looks like for you in terms of how you, evaluate, the team that's ultimately, charged with managing and operating, that particular asset during the hold period?
Yes, absolutely. So having gone through this now multiple times, and just as a little background, I own 6 properties at this point in time. So 6 multifamily properties. I'm working on my 7th one as we speak. And in that process, my first one is going to be always the learning one. So I've had some really good learnings from it. So I'll speak to that, but then because of it, how I've been able to kind of switch my strategy. One of the things that I learned early on in that first property is the role of property management. It's still number one. Having very good, solid team running the property. These are, most of these property managers get kind of starting salary 70, 80K. They are kind of average salary, and they are managing $1 million worth of property. And so we really need to be careful about who's the property management company we are going with. Are they good? Do they have good reputation? So that's been a good learning. Now, making sure that sponsors understand that, how critical their role is. So, one of the things I do ask most of the sponsors is if they have worked with somebody, has it gone well? And also give me an example where it has not gone well. We want to see and make sure they've gone through the trenches of good and bad, not just all good and rosy, because reality is, life doesn't work that way. So that's number one. Number two, I would say, is location. So for me, location is just so critical. I'm very bullish about DFW market. So far, it's been really well, gone really well overall. And it's backed by numbers, right? So make sure, like, even if you are pro a certain location, like you're all in for a certain location, you want to make sure that there's data backing up the right demographic, making sure people are, the average salary of the folks around, it makes sense. There are people actually moving to that location. So that's why that location can be really important. For me, third one, and it always doesn't tend to be for everybody's radar, but for me, safety is really big. It's just my own personal belief that when people feel safe, they bring in the right kind of people, and they also kind of keep a good community in place. So for me, those 3 are the big ones: the right property management, the right location, and then really making sure it's a safe environment to space. Now, one of the default things, regardless of what deal it is, the numbers just have to work. So after all the numbers work, those are the other 3 things I would look for, right? Like if you have the right loan, you got the right cost basis on the property, it's the right rate cap, all of that in place, and I have cash flow. And that's when, like, even after that, those are the other 3 things I would look for in a property.
Yeah, I love that. Talked about the management team, the location, wage growth, job growth, safe neighborhoods, right? All those things are incredibly important. But, then it always comes down to the numbers, and the numbers don't lie, right? And I'm like you, right? If I'm going to invest in a deal, I want that to cash flow day one, even if the sponsor does not implement any phase of their business plan. Okay. They all buy a property, whether it's a build to rent or a value add or core plus, right? Doesn't matter if it's A down to C class, right? Doesn't even matter the asset class. Could be assisted living or retail, flex office, et cetera, right? They all have a plan in place, right? And I personally feel a lot more comfortable deploying my own capital into a sponsor's deal or project if I know that that property will cash flow day number one, even if the lead sponsor doesn't swing a single hammer or evict a single tenant. Does that make sense?
That absolutely makes sense. And as you probably said, the hardest part in all this is when you buy this property, you have to have enough cash reserves, but then also make sure your I call it the balance, right? Like making sure if it's 70% occupancy, that's going to give you a break even number, whether it be 75%. That number really doesn't go above 75% break even, because the reality when a lot of these property sellers are going, they end up filling the property at the end. And I'm sure you, Jeremy, know, like you cannot sell a property, you can't put it on a market below 90% occupancy. It has to be 90% occupancy. So at the end of it, when sellers are trying to get it on the market, they fill it up with maybe not so good renters. So really making sure, yes, it cash flows, but it cash flows with that break even number, ideally about 70 to 75%.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk to that busy professional that was like you and me, technology background, crushing it in corporate America, doing everything we can to climb the corporate ladder, crush the W-2. Then a couple of kids come around, right? What would you say to that in that busy professional that has never invested passively before in anything? Okay, where should that person go to get started, to become educated on the benefits of diversifying outside of Wall Street and into Main Street?
Yeah, great question, Jeremy. Great question. So, what my suggestion would be is you have to learn some of the basic terminology. Just like when we start in corporate America, we join any new job. For first 3 months, we are on training. We need to be on training about our own finances. We have to learn the terms. There is no way around it. And how do we learn the terminology? We end up going to a job, we sit in meetings, and we listen and absorb. You gotta do the same thing with your own personal life, your own finances. And I call this out very specifically because so many of us just don't do that, right? Like we expect to know the financial knowledge very quickly, but that's not the reality. It takes us time to absorb that knowledge and learn. So literally, just like when you're on a brand new job, you go to different events and you just sit and listen and you learn, and then you'll take a couple comments and you'll take notes of what that acronym means and you'll go look it up. Got to do the same thing with real estate, your own financial education. And in the mix, hopefully, you have some books that you like. Ask for people that you meet. Hey, how did you get started? Can you recommend me a couple books? And from there, you have different ways now to be able to, one, listen to people in conferences, two, the books, and three, when you do meet people, if they're willing to answer some of your basic questions as you're meeting, or ask them, what has gone well, what has not gone well, how long they've been doing it. I think those three ways to kind of go about it, just like in any training, right? They talk about the three different ways of learning. It's very similar. We got to get started and, at least getting comfortable with the terminology.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And you're so right there. I mean, I think about, the financial advisor, community that's out there. I mean, and largely speaking, the financial advisor community, you can become an RIA by taking a test, right? And having a background check done, right? Well, the truth is that most advice in the financial realm really comes from the people that are on the front line that are actually doing the investing. It's the people that are actually putting their own money into the strategy, that they're recommending, right? And so what better way to do that than to learn directly from those individuals? If they've authored a book, read their book. Okay.
Yeah.
If they host a podcast, follow their podcast. If they don't, find a podcast that they were a guest on and absorb, right? How are you going to do that? Well, it's going to be through networking, right?
Yeah.
There's great platforms out there like LinkedIn and, other ways to just ask around to see who's in the space today to learn, from them. But eventually, like we've been saying before, and we'll say it again, eventually you've got to get beyond the paralysis by analysis and just get started.
I couldn't agree more. You have to get out there and just start figuring out, if you were to invest, what does that mean? Do you have additional income that is just set aside? And maybe you're getting the great 3 to 4% we get on savings, yay, but the inflation is still 9.5%. Yes, it's gone down from 12 to 9.5. You're not seeing any difference from it, but it's still double. And guess what? The money that sits in the bank from a savings standpoint, it's those banks that end up actually lending us that money. And then we are the ones making more now, usually ideally about 15 to 20% return. The banks are very happy giving us money because they know they're going to get, a decent payment back, and they're giving it to us on 6, 7%. Savings gives you only 4%. That's the max number I've heard. So just kind of some of that basic benchmarking, even really thinking, where are you getting the best returns?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. I'm going to get personal with you if you don't mind. And that my question really now is, how does one balance your professional responsibilities with your personal life, especially considering that you are a mother of 2 young boys?
Yeah. So when you get started with any new job, any new role, and start being an entrepreneur, I think there's definitely that hump that we all climb. So as I was setting it up last year and a half ago now, almost 2 years actually, uh, that took a little time, took a little effort. We had to figure out time where we had to balance being parents, but then also kind of starting a brand new business. Now, the beauty of the setting up our own business was also the fact I could control when I was working on it. And that was a game changer for me personally. So being able to still be present for my kids' activities and be there for when they needed me. But the work could be flexible around, where I didn't need to be at certain meetings. You talked about meetings. Uh, didn't need to be at that certain meeting. So I think that has been a nice shift for me personally. Now, I'll share this one example with you. I was doing this really big project. I said yes to running Target.com. And this was 3 weeks before Cyber Monday, Black Friday. As you know, most retailers are big time. And it was a huge trend. It was a trajectory for my career growth. And that's where, I can pinpoint, like, we all have that one career, one job where it's like, yep, that's where like it just took off. For me, that was the role. In 3 weeks, I took it on. For 3 weeks, I barely saw my children. Loved doing it. And yes, it gave me the growth and trajectory I was looking for. But I always come back and remember that was the one Thanksgiving I wasn't home. So that's still a tough spot to be. But how do we continue to have that growth that doesn't impact family? I think that really shifted for me.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not going to be in our 20s for the rest of our lives, right?
Exactly.
Eventually, we wake up one day and we're like, wow, my kids are almost out of the house now, or they are out of the house.
Right.
How can I get more of my, time back so I can spend, however many, years I have left on this earth? How can I spend those doing the things that I want to do, the passions, that I want to, spend time on, and really, quite frankly, the people that I want to spend that time with as well. So,
Yeah, with that, Jeremy, I'll add one thing. For last 4 years, and so for me, this is a huge personal accomplishment. So I hope your listeners can get something out of that. It took me 4 years to get to a point where I could take a summer off with my kids, and that's huge for me. And I didn't want to be a teacher. Yes, I could, but like that just didn't. That wasn't the right spot for me to get the summer off. But finally, this was the first summer where I could have the whole time with my kids. I'll have 6 years with both of them together in house. So for me, like that's a countdown as well, that we only have 6 summers together before they, become adults and kind of go off to their own life. So that's been a blessing, but it took planning and it took effort. And I can't stress enough. Planning really gets you the right results. You got to really think about the long-term goals and how will you get there. So for me, it took 4 years of getting to this point, but I had been saving 15 years before that and investing in different places.
yeah.
So that would be my kind of parting advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what's next on your bucket list, personally or professionally?
So the professionally, I'm going to continue with the real estate investing. I think working with the right partners, that has been a great journey for me. So having gone through the experience, now I'm very particular about who I would work with, and having in-house property management, in-house construction company, and some of those aspects are huge. having worked with consultants myself in past, and the quality of work you get working with them versus employees, I've seen the difference. So my goal is really, how can I do that more and more? So continue to bring those investments to my investors. Personally, I love going to national parks. So I'm going to my goal is about 2 to 3 new national parks every year. And we are going to Mount Rainier actually later this year. I visited Arches National Park earlier with my kids this year. So 2 to 3 national parks, and continue to kind of, really bring that the nature, the natural environments in my kids' life.
Yeah, that's great. Well, what's maybe 1 or 2 different ways that our listening audience can connect with you to learn more about what you're up to?
Yeah, so I am very active on LinkedIn. So please, go ahead and, connect with me, or you can follow me. So it's LinkedIn and then /Divya Smith. It's just one word. So you can follow me there. On Instagram, I'm there as well at Invest with Divya. So it's EINVEST with DIVYA. So you can find me there as well. Also on YouTube, I also do webinars just like you do, Jeremy. Mine tend to be a lot more informational. I have a lot of people who are kind of in that early phase of learning. So that's another place.
That's great. Well, we'll put those links in the show notes for today's episode. Divya, thank you so much for the value that you've brought our listening audience today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And listening audience, thank you again for jumping into another episode of The Freedom Point. We look forward to having you join us on the next episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the Freedom Point podcast, powered by Starting Point Capital. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decision, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the Freedom Point podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. If you're interested in connecting, you can find contact information at startingpointcapital.com.